Good morning, good afternoon, sorry. My name is Samantha Riles from Sugar Research Australia, and I'd like to welcome you to our fifth and final Milling Regional Research Seminar for 2020. Today we have two speakers. David Moller from Queensland University of Technology will be presenting on changes in colour during dropping pan crystallisation, and Professor Ross Broadfoot will also be presenting on understanding the cause of high colour sugar. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded and a copy of it and the slides will be sent to all registrants. Throughout the presentation, all attendees will be on mute. If you have any technology issues, please send a message in the chat box, which is located on the menu bar of your webinar screen. If you experience any issues in hearing the sound coming from your computer, please feel free to join by phone. I put this number in the chat box. I will be assisting as a co-host to ensure that all runs smoothly. We encourage you to take an active part in today's webinar by asking questions. As this webinar is in listen-only mode, you can do this at any time throughout the webinar by typing your questions into the Q&A button on the menu bar. At the end of each presentation, there will be an opportunity for David and Ross to answer those questions. If it is easier for you to ask your question verbally than to type in the Q&A, please use the hand up button and I will then be able to unmute your microphone. As I moderate the questions, I will let you know who is asking the questions. If you prefer to stay anonymous, there is a box you can check to remain anonymous. Our attendees from today include staff from these milling companies: Wilmar, Sunshine Sugar, Mackay Sugar, MSF Sugar and Bundaberg Sugar. I'd now like to hand over to our first presenter for today, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. I'll just hop right in if I could. I'm just going to share my screen. So this is a small presentation that I was going to give at the AWCT conference this year. This is but a small component of a larger test program. The test program was looking at, primarily was looking at changes in all sugar quality parameters during crystallization, particularly during the last dropping pan run of crystallization. And the test program started in, was scheduled to start in 2017. The sugar quality parameters at the time were all quite good, so it was decided, it was agreed to delay it. The results you'll see today were actually during a test program in 2018. Again, our primary focus wasn't available. It wasn't a problem during that year, but we still got these results anyway. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. So why sample during a dropping cycle? Well, this program enables you to actually see what's happening throughout the dropping cycle, which is usually unique during operations. Okay, during operations, we normally only see the final result of the dropping pan cycle, i.e. the raw sugar quality at the end, and we don't see what happens if we change some of the run-up parameters during the dropping pan cycle. So this was looking at, this program looked at, went through 3 different sites, and at each different site we changed the number of parameters to see how they impacted on the sugar quality parameters. 3 Australian factories were used. Each of the factories was producing the same target sugar quality at the time. It was a 99.2 pole. Sugar colour, between 1200 and 1600 colour was the desired. Sugar and Mascot was collected during the batch pan strike. Okay, some of the raw sugar was affinated to provide an indication of the crystal quality, and 1 factory facilitated the arrangement with continuous pans. So just a bit before we go on to the graphs and the results, a bit of explanation on the graphs. A Mascot, it's illustrated by dashed orange lines. The B Mascot is illustrated by solid blue lines. And throughout the test program, just so happened that I end up doing more B Mascot results than A Mascot results. The first sample was done as close as possible to pan charge, and after a couple of about 10 minutes of operation to make sure that the pan was well mixed, that's when I collected the first sample. The last sample was as close as possible to pan drop. Okay, so this was typically after the pan was full during the heavy up cycle. In mill 1, the round marker represents batch pans and the square marker represents continuous pans. Note that for each of the sets of graph, it is the same scale on the y-axis. Okay, it's just first looking at Mascot Color. So this is mill 1 and this is for mill 1. So this enabled the testing of batch pans and continuous pans. The process of sample collection was a sample was collected from the batch pan just after the batch pan cycle, and then after that sample was processed, a sample was collected from the continuous pan at the corresponding way along the continuous pan corresponding to that part of the pan cycle. So that meant that I was only able to take 4 samples during the batch pan cycle for each test run. What we can see from this graph is that there is some considerable variation in Mascot color at the start of the cycle. Obviously, the B Mascots increased in color with the boil back throughout the cycle, and we had some very high Mascot colors at the end. The A Mascots also increased during the boil back, but the Mascot colors were quite reasonable. Throughout this program, there was not found to be too much of a difference between the color between the batch and the continuous pans. However, when you looked at the color on a percent impurities basis, the continuous pan was as good, or if not better, than all of the batch pan tests, the corresponding tests. For mill 2, Mascot color, a tight starting point of the Mascot color, and again, increase for the B Mascots, and very little change for the A Mascots, with only a very small amount of boil back put on at the end of the cycle. So this is probably what could be expected. And during our test program, which was carried out over a week, some very little change in starting Mascot color at mill 2. Mill 3. So at mill 3, timing's everything with a sample program. The week that I happened to be at mill 3 is that mill 3 suffered a number of mechanical breakdowns on the fugal syrup pumps. This resulted in significant delays for a number of the batch pan cycles. What was identified is that when the pans were held on water, so this cycle, and this cycle here, there was a slight increase in Mascot color during that period. However, when we did the reducing sugar analysis of those Mascots, it wasn't identifiable in increased reducing sugar production generation during that period. So the raw sugars that I produce from each Mascot during the test program, it's very difficult to get a consistent raw sugar quality. So very early on, it was decided that the raw sugar, I would get a Mascot sample, subsample that from Mascot analysis, and then I'd get a raw sugar sample through a little batch centrifuge, and that raw sugar sample would be a no wash raw sugar. So there was, as the cycles went on, the raw sugar color actually got darker just because they weren't getting washed. So a better thing to look at would be the fine sugar color. So the raw sugars were collected, and we used BSS method 34 to try to get a near crystal color. Now I appreciate this is not the crystal color method, it's the fine sugar method, but it's almost the crystal color. Looking at mill 1, despite the large variation in Mascot colors, if we can remember the original graph, what we found is that the fine sugar color was very consistent for mill 1 for both the A and the B Mascots, with the B Mascots being slightly higher. Similarly with mill 3. So despite the large change in Mascot color at the end of the cycle, there was a slight increase in crystal color. Okay, these for the pans that are on hold, but it didn't show up in the A pan that was on hold, this one here. One of the big features of the test program was the results for the fine sugar color at mill 2. What we found is that despite the consistent Mascot colors, the fine sugar color at start of the dropping pan cycle was very high and very variable. It was interesting to note during the dropping pan cycle, remember this is the very last cycle of the crystal, the fine sugar colors dropped and then increased as the boil back went on. And this part here was identified as an area of interest throughout the program. Looking at a slightly different way, the fine color, percent Mascot color for mill 1 actually slightly decreases throughout. The B's slightly decrease, the A's are very consistent. For mill 3, again, A's are very consistent, and the B's are at a slightly lower level, but they remain fairly consistent with the Mascot color. However, for mill 2, this starting crystal color was found to be very unusual. And again, just slightly different way, same information. The Mascot colors on the bottom axis, the fine sugar colors on the y-axis. There's a relationship here at mill 1. Similar relationship at mill 3. However, the results we got from mill 2, particularly down the low end, was like a shotgun blast. And these were the starting crystal colors, due to the starting crystal colors. Possible issues, differences. The seed material at mill 2 could have, well, obviously was very high in crystal color. That could have been due to poor circulation in the crystal, poor circulation in the seed pan, or it could have been at that particular site is the production might have been pushing quite hard with very high growth rates, resulting in higher level exclusions for the seed crystal. At that factory at the time, they were seeing some high extraneous matter in the cane supply, and that could also have been contributing to the higher viscosity, poor pan circulation. It is unknown what the effect of these impurities actually had, because that wasn't able to be studied as part of this program. So just in conclusion, sample analysis through the strike can provide some more useful information about some root causes of the final product. And as a result of this program, we're able to feed that information back to mill 2, and they did some further investigations on to try to improve that problem. I think I might hand it over to any questions.
Okay, so question time, anyone. If you've got any questions, put it in the Q&A, or you can add it in the chat box. At the moment, David, there's no questions, so we may even go back to those at the end if we need to.
Just, like I said, this is a very small part of a much larger report. The final report for this project is submitted to SRA. It's a 100-page report. It includes all the sugar quality parameters, results on all the sugar quality parameters, and it would be available from SRA. it would be available from SRA for anyone that would like it.
Okay, thanks, David. So our second presenter for today is Ross Broadfoot. So Ross, I'll get you to organise your slides. Yep, we can see those. Thank you.
All right, okay. So thanks everyone for coming into the seminar this afternoon. So the topic, understanding the cause of high colour sugar. And before we get into it, I'd like to thank the massive contribution that Rob Stovey made to this project. So I don't know why he's not presenting this afternoon, but I think he was going to do the ASSCT paper, which obviously has been held up to next year. This was a small milling project, basically to investigate a problem that's starting to emerge in the industry. Don't seem to be going, Sam. Can you see me?
Okay, so your slides, I can see the front page. You want to try using the arrows on your keyboard or on your mouse?
I am.
Yep, it's moved along now. We're up to the colour issue.
It's slow, okay, right.
No worries.
Good, thanks. So, you know, the background of this was that it's become obvious that for some factories, and particularly for factories processing green cane, certain times of the year, they're getting very high raw sugar colours, but I guess most worrying, they're getting high fine sugar colours. And obviously that's a concern from a marketing point of view. And to give you an idea, some of those fine sugar colours are greater than 700. So, you know, typically we'd say a good fine sugar colour would be 400 or a bit less. And you might have noticed that in Dave's presentation that for mill 1 and mill 3, most of that data was around that 400 mark or lower. So we're getting numbers up around 700. This is the worry. So obviously, what's the cause? Well, quite a challenge because it could very much be associated with the impurities coming in the cane supply. And that might be a variety effect, or it could be EM, which is a bit of an issue for these particular factories looking at in this exercise. It could be something we're doing in the factories. It could be that you know, some aspect of pan balling or whatever may be contributing to the uptake of impurities and causing extra colour. Could be a combination of the two. So the program M1 and M3. I'll point out that M1 here is David's M2, for those interested. So these three mills are basically, so pretty typical Australian mills: rod evaporators, juice clarification system, 3 Mascot boiling scheme, magma used to make the A and the B sugars. Nothing unusual amongst them in that regard. At M1 and M2, and this is what the attractions we had in this project was, they do measure the EM in the cane supply. So they segregate grab samples and look at the tops and trash and get an idea of how much EM is coming in. So quite important for this exercise here. As we all know, colour can change through the season. And so we set about to do a sampling in 4 periods through the season. All the work was actually done in 2018. It would have been presented last year, except quite a lot of data to analyse and wasn't really ready. Our conclusions weren't really ready by the regional seminars last year. We looked at the factories basically in 2 halves. What's going on from juice to liquor, liquor actually evaporators, and the other one is what's going on in the pan stage, or pan and fugal stage, magma through to Mascot, and then washing and fugling to give us our shipment sugar. As it turned out, at M3 factory, they do occasionally do high-grade graining, and we did get the opportunity there to get some data to compare high-grade graining with magma at 2 periods of the season. A substantial part of the project was to look at the removal of colour and impurities in the fugal washing process. So we'll talk quite a bit about that towards the end of this presentation. a big program, much bigger than really you'd expect in a small milling project, which is really great thanks to Wilmar and to Rob in particular. Colour analyses for the juices and mascots were undertaken at the mills, at their mill laboratories. Sugar analyses were also undertaken at the mills, but for particular samples, so those corresponding to brand 1, we sent down a gateway for each test and each mill, got them analysed there, and also they did affinations and did analyses on those fine sugars. So looking at the cane supply, like this, you can't really lock in your cane quality for any length of time, and obviously when you're starting to look at recycles of streams around pan stages, etc., it's not possible. But the dominant variety for these 3 mills is Q208, which SRA classify as being basically a low to medium colour variety. As it turned out, so we're looking for large, obviously, and this was particularly more of interest for the juice to liquor sampling, because obviously there's several hours of cane that influences the pan stage work. But for the large rakes that were taken when corresponding when we initiated the samples, these tend to be more what's classified as being the high to medium colour varieties. And I've got the list here. So just some of those were KQ228, Q231, 232 and 250. So I guess the main thing we're looking at really is seeing if we can get a variation in the EM coming to the factories and see what influence that may be. So here's the EM data from M1 and M2 factories for the 4 periods. As we go forward in this presentation, period 1 is July, period 2 August, etc., etc. So total EM for factory M1 was about 11–12%, which is actually a little bit lower than their average. They fairly high EM factory. Very fortunately for M2, we had a period here, period 3, when the EM was lower, and hopefully that held for quite some time around that period and gave us influence through the pan stage, which we observed. So looking at some of the results, first of all, juice to liquor. The mixture colours were pretty typical of you'd expect, about 8,000 to 18,000. Mill M3, Rob did some work where he sampled ESJ and liquor several times in different periods and determined the increase to be about 5%. And that's sort of in line with quite a bit of other work around the place. Probably some of that was more like 3%, but yeah. So not a great increase goes on in the evaporators. 4, I guess we've got to qualify that for factories using 120 degrees C steam and in our typical arrangement. The plot is actually for a parameter we call colour intensity. Now, colour intensity is just an easy way of saying colour per 1% of impurities. So this is what we're plotting in this graph here. So we've got the three mill data. This is mill M1, M2 and M3. And as it turns out for mill M2, it's got the lowest colour intensity in the liquor. And as it turns out, coincidentally or otherwise, low EM period was the lowest liquor colour intensity. We do sort of look at some of this data as being coincidental until it all sort of comes together and think, well, it's a bit hard to ignore basically the approach we're taking. Colour development. Notice a colour increase in the magma right through the season. That was a pretty standard observation. Despite the changing magma colour, pretty well the A Mascot colours were fairly consistent, sitting around 20,000 to 25,000 units. One thing that was important to note was what boiling times are available for each of the strikes on the pan stages. And basically M1 and M2 were running fairly similar times. M3 was a little bit different, as we'll see. For all factories, 4 to 5 hours was available for magma to the high-grade seed. But when we get down to the A and B boilings, mills M1 and M2 have pretty well the standard time you'd expect, 2 to 3 hours available for an A, up to 3.5 of that order for a B, whereas factory M3 was really pushing it pretty hard. And the pan we were sampling from was really pretty short operation. So fast crystallisation going on in there. Looking at some colour intensity values for the high-grade seed. So at M2 and M3, the colour intensity of the high-grade seed was lower than that for the magma. And basically you'd expect this because the liquor has got a lower colour intensity, so it's colour per unit of 1 unit of impurities, than your magma. So you'd expect as you feed on liquor, your colour intensity would come down. And that was the case for M2 and M3 factories. However, M1, it went the other way. There was obviously something going on in the high-grade seed development in factory M1, which, if you recall, was factory M2 in David's work. And we had higher intensity of colour in the high-grade seed than in the magma from which it started. And we do believe this high-grade seed pan there has got a few circulation problems. It's a tall pan and it does boil to a fairly high level. And whether that was contributing, but certainly it stands out very much that the high-grade seed colour development at M1 is quite different. It's most likely contributed to that circulation. So the factory fugals, this is all taken off factory fugals. For the samples of brand 1 sugar we had, they were sent to Gateway, and they analysed those and also analysed the fine sugars that they prepared from them. And there's the 4 periods down the side, and there's the colours we obtained from the data we got back from Gateway. And I guess the 2 main things we took out of this data was, I guess overall they're fairly standard, what you would expect in terms of colour intensities of A and B sugars. But mill 3, quite high colour intensity, much higher than around the 2,200 is normally seen. And it was particularly high for the A sugars over here. Mill M2 had the lowest colour intensity of the B sugar, very similar to the A actually. So that was showing quite a difference between M3 and M2. I said early on, factory M3 does do some high-grade grainings on occasions, and for period 2 and period 4, we were able to get data both off the high-grade grainings, the A sugar produced from high-grade graining, and B sugar also, and also magma at the same period. Not totally definitive in terms of the results. I guess there's one outlier that knocked us around a bit. But looking at period 4, it does tell us a bit of information that follows through. If you look at for the A sugar and high-grade graining, substantially lower colour than for the magma produced seed. But you'd still say really quite high colours for a fine sugar. For the B, again, the magma produced, the B sugar produced from magma was of higher colour than the B sugar produced from high-grade graining. So it is showing that the high-grade graining would appear to be giving us a fine sugar colour than the magma in period 4 at M3. But one really, I guess, noteworthy information is the fact that the A sugar fine colour is greater than the B sugar fine colour. Not usual, but this came through both for the high-grade graining, the A sugar for the high-grade graining, and for the A sugar for the magma. They're showing higher colours than for the B. And we'll see that following through in other slides. Looking at some fine sugar colours, the way this graph is set up, We've got the mill M1 is blue, M2 is orange, and M3 is grey. And the periods are aligned along the bottom. So there's all our period 1. It's got here for the A and the B sugar. We do have 2 Mg, being 2 made from magma, so most of our data is here. But for mill M3, we've got 2 high-grade graining, just the single values from, that's the only factory where we did any high-grade graining tests. Period 3, period 4 Mg, and period 4 high-grade graining. So a bit of information in this slide to absorb. So for mills M1 and M3, we draw a line across here at 400 colour. A substantial amount of that data, or the sugars obtained at M1 and M3, was above 400, which was saying is our target. Whereas on the other hand, for M2, most of the data is below 400, apart from the very last period of the season. So we did get up around just over the 400 to 500 for M2. Looking at the data, the lowest defined A and B sugar colours was for period for mill M2 period 3. So it's here, these two. And if you recall, that was the period of lowest EM in the factories. Coincidence? It's there. For mills M1 and M2, the refined sugar colours in A are less than the refined sugar colours as B. So looking here, so here's A, here's B, here's A, here's B, and likewise for M2, A, B, you go through and they're all showing A defined colour is lower than the B. However, we come to mill M3, and it's quite a different colour of the refined sugar for A is greater than B. Similar there, A greater than B, that's their high grade graining, A greater than B, etc. But the only thing we could think of was maybe this fast growth of the A sugar in particular at M3 due to that short cycle time was a significant contributing factor. So that's looking at colour, but we also said, okay, well, we've got to really look and see how much impurities are actually being included in the crystal, or when I say included, in the fine crystal. For this plot here, so we're looking at the impurity concentration of the sugar. And so we've got, in this case, we've got the graph done a little bit differently. We've got all data for mill M1 grouped here, and mill M2 over here, and mill M3 over here. And we've got the periods of the season down the side here, which you can see there. So looking, I guess, not too closely, but as a general observation, period 3 had the highest impurity concentration in the sugar of all 3 mills. The period 3 was September. They're all under high liquor purities, high production loadings on the pan stage. So it may be because they were really pushing a bit harder that came through. But one really noticeable factor is the fact that the impurity concentration for mill M3 out here is substantially higher for both the A and the B sugars than for A sugar and for B sugar. So, sorry, that's really dead. So you look here, and also, yeah, so, and also the impurity concentration in the A sugar is greater for B. So here's the A's, this block here, and here's their B's. You can see that these were showing more impurities in the fine sugar for the A's and for the B's. Quite unexpected, certainly not usual. And for period 3, for mill 2 had the lowest impurity concentration for mills M1 and M3. And if you recall, that period 3 for M2 had the lowest EM. So again, we're getting a coincidental effect coming through. And let's look at these data here, compare with this data here, the yellow ones. So we're seeing EM effects lining up. We're seeing substantial differences coming through for factory M3. And I guess really unexpectedly, the A sugar having more impurities and more colour in the fine sugars than for B. For comparison, we're going to do in these photographs. We're going to compare, have a look at what that sugar was like. This is for factory M2, A sugar period 3, and for factory M3 period 3. And you see this in the photographs here. So, you know, this is where we had all these impurities for factory M3 compared with factory M2. And I guess one noteworthy aspect of these impurities loaded in here is the fact that they're fairly well distributed right through the crystal. A high impurity loading coming in or some particular phase, but it does appear to be fairly uniform, consistent uptake of impurities and hence colour for factory M3. And this is just an example for period 3. Now, the other aspect we wanted to look at was to look at the removal efficiency of impurities and colour during fugling. So for these tests, 4 different wash times we used. So the first one being as the operator set up to do brand 1 sugar, and then we did it for half the wash time, twice the wash time, and 3 times the wash time. This is done for A and B sugars, and done for each period, done at each mill. So the example shown here, this is for mill M1, period 1 for a B sugar. Just gives you an idea. We've got, here's our 4 wash times. One example, 2, 3, and 4. The sample of brand 1 was sent to Gateway and they analysed it again, and there it is there. So very close to the M1 laboratory result. And this is their sugar data in colour versus impurity percent sugar. We've got a beautiful straight line, and I will admit that it wasn't chosen at random, but it gives you a good example of the data we're able to get. So there's two parameters that here are important. Obviously the slope, that tells you how much colour you're going to remove for each unit of removal of impurities. And the other one is, so if you've got a lot of colour just on the outside of the crystal, obviously you're going to get a high removal of colour per unit removal of impurities. If you've got more colour included in the crystal, it'll be a lower rate of removal. And also the other parameter is, okay, what's this intercept mean? And it basically tells us something about the relative amounts of colour that are included in the crystal to that that's on the surface. So if you end up with a positive value, it's sort of telling you that in that washing process you weren't able to get to, and removing the impurities in the washing process, you weren't able to remove colour as well as you would have liked, because some of it's bound up inside the crystal. So they're the 2 parameters we take off it, and obviously there they are there for this particular plot. So looking at the data for the 3 mills, the top graph here is all the data for factory M1. A very good linear relationship when you put the A's and B's together and all the data. And it's showing a slope of 2250, intercept just above 0. I haven't got the plot for M2, but it was pretty similar. Slightly lower value, but as you'd expect, a little bit higher value corresponding, that reduction there. But again, very low. It's showing that extrapolating out to the intercept, about 100 colour units. Here's M3 down the bottom. It does extrapolate to a value of about 430. So a higher amount indicating being held within the crystal. Not a particularly good correlation coefficient, and that's demonstrated by the variability in the effects of washing that we're getting at M3. Corresponding to that higher amount showing in the crystal, being embedded in the crystal, then our washing slope isn't as high. In other words, when we wash, we don't remove as much impurities because you can't get at it. So this data, which was a lot of work on Rob and his team's part, confirms that sugar at M3 had a high level of included colour, and obviously we've got a lot of data to just tell us that anyhow. And also there's greater variation in the washing behaviour because those variable amounts of inclusions in the colour and impurities in the crystal itself. So just to so we reckon we did see factory influences and also EM influences. For the factory practices at M1, a high level of colour development in the high-grade seed pan was sort of a bit of a standout aspect, and Dave saw that in his work as well. And we're expecting that as pan circulation, difficulties coming through there. The other main factory practice we've taken out of it is that for M3, there's a high level of impurities included in the A and B sugar. The colour of the refined A sugar is greater than that of the B sugar, and the impurities in the A sugar, included in the refined A sugar, are greater than the impurities in the refined B sugar. Unexpected result, and we're putting it down to the fast boiling times for the A mascots. And I will say that Rob's obviously followed on doing more work in that area. So they're the two main things. So we're saying that factory practice is certainly having a part to play in making a highly coloured fine sugars. When it comes to EM, there's certainly quite a bit of data that came through showing that higher EM inflates the liquor colour, inflates the sugar colour, and it also inflates the colour intensity. So those impurities coming in with the cane supply and with the EM, or they bring in more colour, or they actually promote more colour development during processing, subject to heat and time. Perhaps those colour components that are produced from the EM have a higher propensity to align with the crystals, and so get taken up in the crystal structure itself more. All conjecture, but they're all factors that are pretty well supported through laboratory work that several other researchers have done around the place. So there's no question that EM is a factor on these colour parameters, and we think we saw it here as well. So at the last point we're really making is that EM levels must be acceptable if we're going to avoid the production of high coloured raws and high coloured refined sugars. So if we don't keep a good handle on our EM, we can get a situation where our colours, our raws produced won't be well accepted by refiners because of the embedded colour that's in that fine sugar that they can't get out when they're in their affination process. So it's important that we do keep an eye on this going forward. By at the factory, 3 factories, the laboratory staff, operational staff, and also production management. Also laboratory staff at QUT undertook some of the work, and obviously we sent samples to Gateway as well. It was an enormous, I guess, laboratory analysis program. It worked out very well. In there I'd like to mention Rob Stovey again, because his efforts were phenomenal in coordinating the project, and I guess also being meticulous in even abandoning a trial if a factory interruption came that might have known to disturb our results. So he did his absolute best to get good results in a very difficult program. So funding from Sugar Research Australia was obviously very much appreciated. This is through the Small Milling Research Program. And I'll also say that Wilmar also contributed substantial funds to complete this project. So thank you very much, and if there's any questions, I'll hand over to Rob. I'd like to.
Hi Ross, we do have a question here. Do you have any comments about the subsequent season results for M3 affined sugar colours versus any changed practices?
Rob might like to put something in there, but I'll just make a point. I don't think they've been in a position where they can change the practices that readily. I know we did actually get some more samples sent down last year, and we did photographs on those. I think it sort of demonstrated pretty well that there was those inclusions were again present, contributing to colour within the crystal. Looks like we have Rob on.
Yes, Ross. I think what I can say is we didn't do a lot of work to follow up on this last year, but we did do visual work. But we are hoping to take a closer look at that during 2020 to get some visuals, mainly visual analysis, but perhaps not so much laboratory analysis under the current circumstances.
Yep. Thanks, Rob.
Okay, thanks, Rob. At the moment, Ross, we don't have any further questions. If anybody would like to put a question in, I can come back to it. Please note that tomorrow when I send the email out with the details, both Ross and David's contact details will be on there if you need to contact them at all. So we might just do a little wrap up then. So thank you to David and Ross for presenting today. And thank you all for attending our 5th and final SRA and QUT Milling Regional Research Seminar. We hope that you found it of value and are keen to get feedback from you. After this session, you will receive a link to a survey that we'd like you to complete. It will only take a few minutes of your time and will allow us to improve our webinars in the future. Tomorrow, you will receive an email with the recording and slides. Please go to the SRA webpage to see any recordings from our previous regional research seminar topics and the milling webinar series. This concludes our regional research seminar series for 2020, and I look forward to our 2021 program, which will hopefully be in person. I just had a comment here from Rob just saying thank you to Ross for presenting today.
I'll thank Rob for being at the ASST next year.
So thanks for everyone for coming along, and we'll see you next year. Thanks.
Thank you. See you.